So first topic today is on one of the many different changes that come with COVID. And this is a change in donor psychology. As we all, I think, know, there's this idea of social norming and this opportunity for social modeling. The idea that the reason that your mom had to warn you about if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you do it too, is that we have this ingrained sense of ourselves to be connected to what other people are doing that extends into donations. So we want to donate what other people are donating. We're more likely to be swayed by similar types of people. So people like me do things like this is one of the most effective pitches that you can have. The information about what of a gift, we can be swayed by how much other people are giving, that what factor. And then the question that these researchers are looking at is where the context of giving. So the idea of did COVID change and will COVID change how primed we are by social information. So this group of researchers were fortunate enough to do the same experience twice in China. So April and May 2020, and then they also did it in February and March of last year, which was an easing period in COVID for them. And it's a common game that researchers use to determine philanthropic intent, where you are given a certain amount of money or units that translate to money. Some of it's in a private account that you could keep, some of it's in a charitable account, and you can move money between them. And in this case, they said that some of the people taking the studies would be how they would allocate giving from the researchers. So there is some real world stakes to, I'm giving donations, therefore it's important, and you actually do get some of the money that comes from this, from these units. 10 units translates to 1 renminbi, which translates to 16 cents. So not a huge amount of money, but enough that over a number of different experiments, you can have different amounts of money coming in. They were using an equivalent, kind of the Chinese equivalent of Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which reaches all sorts of people across the country. So they asked if you wanted to give, then they gave you social information in one way, shape, or form. And then they asked you if you want to change your decision. So we're looking at that sort of change mentality. And then they said they also tested people's levels of social anxiety, which I think we all know COVID increased across the world in various forms. So donations were to essentially a restricted fund for the Chinese Charity Federation, which is kind of their equivalent of the United Way. In fact, United Way helped set that up in China. So when I say given social information, people were given either baseline. They said you'll be given information about what 2 other people are doing. So the baseline is 2 other people didn't change at all. The positive social information is people moved almost all of their money from the personal account to the charitable account. And then on the flip side, the negative information is 2 other people moved almost all of their money from their charitable account to their personal account. They pulled it back. So most research studies look at this positive information. This was an interesting test because it allowed for people to be less charitable and see if that has a contagion effect as well. So the results during the peak of COVID, the positive donation condition was far more contagious. So if you heard that 2 other people had given more, 32% of those people changed to give more in their final tally of things, versus 18 who got the negative information and made a change. When COVID pulled back, that difference was went from statistically significant to statistically insignificant. The difference between positive and negative, while you see it a little bit in the graph there, it wasn't a significant change. In fact, previous studies have said that negative information can be more contagious than positive information. So this says that in COVID, in times of social anxiety, that flips around and we're more likely to give more positively. And in fact, you also saw a change in the amount that people were giving. So the absolute amount, so you have these 100 units, the average change during the peak period when you got positive information was about 15. For negative, it was about 12, which was nearly statistically significant. During the easing period, that flipped around and they were statistically tied, basically speaking. So during COVID, people were more likely to be affected by positive social norms, and they were more likely to give more because of it. So more people affected more greatly, and that's not the case in this. And so the researchers found that that social anxiety measure, whether someone was feeling social anxiety, completely mediated the relationship between pandemic abatement and the decrease in contagion of positive donation behaviors. What that means is social anxiety, if you take social anxiety out of the equation and control for that, there's no effect anywhere. All of the effect that you saw where positive was greater than negative during COVID was due to a greater level of social anxiety. So during these socially anxious times, people are looking to, the researchers say, more cues on the positive side of what other people are doing. And as they hear that other people are doing good things, they also want to do good things. I have an alternate hypothesis that could play in here, which is it's a COVID charity. And it may be giving to a charity that is fighting COVID and fighting the effects of COVID. It may be less compelling when COVID is less. So we may have stickier preferences for something that we're believing in very strongly at the time. If that pulls back, that may not have as big an effect. But kind of interesting to see that both positive and negative social norming work, and that in times of greater social anxiety, it could be that positive is more influential than negative. So shout out any questions we have in the chat, anything in the QA. And while we're waiting on chats and QA, I will set up our other study today, modeling donors out of Facebook. So this was an interesting study out of Europe, looking at, can we get accurate acquisition information for donors strictly out of the people who are fans of their page, based on what other pages they like, what other groups they're in, and we build an acquisition model that is exclusively from those data. They did it from an anonymous, large European nonprofit. And then on the back end, they went to the organization's CRM to say, who's donating and can we match these to the fans that we have information on? So the overlying stats is that they were able to come up with basically 8,200 Facebook fans. They had to take out the people that didn't like other things or those sorts of folks. They also took out people who were already donors. So 477 individuals that had matched, donated before they became fans. So lots of different, as you can see, pages, lots of different groups. The idea that the average person likes 80 different unique Facebook pages is mind-boggling to me. Now they did reduce the dimension of that. They looked at pages that had greater cross-applicability. So if someone, if a page was just liked once, it wasn't going to influence the model. I think there was a threshold of at least 20 likes had to come in. And then farther down the road, I think they looked at models where they were only looking at the top 100 pages or page categories to simplify things. But it should be noted that the outcome that they're trying to predict, donating based on being a Facebook fan, is relatively rare. 1.2% of, and this is in the year following, I believe, but only 1.2% of the Facebook fans became donors during that time. So they're trying to solve for a rather small n. This is a good indication. Take these results with a grain of salt. But I do think they're kind of indicative of larger trends because there is some predictive value in here. So the less interesting result that you have here is, yes, you can create this model. The best model identified, it says, I phrased this poorly, 3.33 times as many donors as a random model. So it's a 233% increase, not a 333% increase. Apologies on that. But substantial increase over just trying to go after all of your Facebook fans. The model also, if you picked a random donor and a random non-donor, there's a 72% chance that the model would have picked that random donor as scoring higher than the random non-donor, which, you know, random's 50%, so it's an improvement on random. And the idea that you could increase your results threefold, that's pretty good. But I think we all know that models can be effective. What the interesting part was, for me at least, was what were the things that were predictive. And so they listed out in the results the top 10 groups that were most predictive. Number one is a category of bars, pubs, cafes, education, higher education, nightlife. So that's one category of correlated variables. Number two is secondhand selling. 3 is living in Liege, and then so on. There's actually a good summary of it here. So number one is basically, are you a college student? Are you interested in higher education, bars, nightlife, dancing? So a particular type of college student as well. So that's that was the number one most predictive variable. Second and the fifth category here were both about secondhand sales. So these are people who are, the researchers talked about them as responsible consumers, and there's a bigger movement for responsible consumption, doing secondhand goods as an environmental approach in Europe than there is here. The people from Liege, Belgium, University of Liege, you know, we have the Indiana University School of Philanthropy, Lilly School of Philanthropy, that does all this great research into philanthropic giving. The kind of Belgian equivalent there is the University of Liege, and so that could be an influential factor there. Humorous and left-wing media was group number 4. Number 6 was well-known brands, so you have things like Coca-Cola in there, but also some more well-known brands in Belgium. And number 7 is things that you might anticipate in terms of people who liked this page also liked Amnesty and MSF and UNICEF and Barack Obama. And so that sort of political slant as well as other philanthropic interests. So looking at what matters, it was very little, gender was not a top 25 factor, but things like what category someone is liking, what group someone is in, very few frequency variables on Facebook. It's more things that are indicative of your identity as a donor. And so they had a good sum up here to say that Facebook fans that become donors are different in demographics, socioeconomics, values, personality traits. And the great thing is, because I tend to be a bit of a Facebook critic, we had an incident in our school district a few months ago where they had to send out information about the punch a teacher supposing trend on TikTok. And so the school board was debating it and the schools were figuring out it's safe. It turned out that was a Facebook hoax spread by their PR agencies to try to smear TikTok. That's one of the more minor things that Facebook has done, but not a fan by and large. And so it's good to me to see that the types of information that you have here can also be found offline or through other means. So there is a DIY aspect to this. You can do this type of modeling, or you can have your partners do this type of modeling. The thing that is missing from this, that Facebook has, that Facebook will by and large not have other than fundraising through Facebook, is philanthropic giving. We all know, having a lot of us been brought up in the RFN segmentation days, using strictly transactional variables. Transactions are nicely predictive. The best predictor of whether someone will give is whether they give. And at the risk of being, I say that at the risk of being arrested by the tautology police. And so givers give, and Facebook doesn't necessarily know that, but they show that these other factors can be predictive, all of which by and large you can get from other channels. And in fact, whether you like another page is mildly predictive. Looking at number 7 here, liking UNICEF Belgium, liking Barack Obama, liking Doctors Without Borders, is itself predictive, but using that type of co-op data where you're able to say, here's a person who gives to Doctors Without Borders is going to be even more predictive. And so this is a case to be made for, yes, looking at these variables, yes, understanding how they work for your organization so you know who your people are, but also for wonderfully balanced and varied models that include all factors, because in the Forrest Gump sense, you never know what you're going to get. So questions on either of these two studies, Facebook modeling or our Chinese contagion effect of social norms? That's some kind of weird ones this month, hopefully enjoyable. If they weren't, let me give the same pitch as I did at the beginning. We would love to hear what topics you would like to hear about. That would be incredibly helpful to hear. I need to know more about how to attack inflation with my ask strings, or I need to know about demographic differences and how people respond, so on and so forth. All of those things are on the table. Want to hear what you want to hear. And then even better, if you have tests that you have done that you would like to share, we love those as much as I love the Academy and the research that they put out that I think can be highly instructive. It's not the same as running it live. Running it in MTurk isn't the same as mailing it out, isn't the same as sending out the email, isn't the same as doing the digital ads. So we do have something in the chat. I recently read that Facebook has curtailed the types of information that you can select to create lookalike profiles. Would that relate to the study? Absolutely. So with, I'm not going to be talking our own book here, I should say, because this is something that I've talked to people at other companies and other organizations as well, and I've seen as a general trend. Over the past year, Facebook, because it's A, curtailing the types of information that they can use, and B, doesn't have as much information as they have because of the loss of cookies and the loss of cross-platform tracking. Both of those are hurting its data infrastructure. And so Facebook results have been across the board poorer and poorer over the past year is what we've seen as a general trend. And when we've been able to stabilize them from our digital folks and talking with them, it's using ever more sophisticated tactics. And in fact, what we are counseling folks do is not to create your lookalike profile in Facebook. You still use Facebook, the platform, for advertising, more's the pity, in my opinion. I should stress that, and this is not Nonprofit Alliance policy, this is not more policy, this is just my own opinion. But instead, build the lookalike model outside of Facebook. So you can use all of the donation data, you can use all of these sorts of different pieces of data. And so that is then more effective than Facebook's lookalike models, because Facebook has all of these different types of data except donation modeling. So what you saw here was a good increase in acquisition using Facebook data. We're seeing better results when Facebook is used as a platform rather than a data modeler. So that's one sort of thing there. We're also seeing that advertising through means, once you have that audience, advertising through means that aren't Facebook are increasing in effectiveness and Facebook's decreasing. And so we're having programmatic media buys that are outpacing Facebook results. So it's a shift in audience philosophy, and it's a shift in platform usefulness. So Facebook still effective in some ways, but as you called out, what they're gathering in terms of information, both in terms of what they'll let you model on, and which honestly is a good change. There's a lot of private data that they were letting folks model on, and it allowed for sophisticated cyber stalking and things like that. So it was a well overdue change, but it does hurt us as advertisers. And then Apple pulling back on cross-platform tracking, we've really seen that go down over the past year. And again, at the risk of talking my own book, we have at the More page, wearemore.com, we have a free webinar about how the cookie crumbles, kind of talking about what these Facebook changes are and what changes can be made. You don't have to register to see it, and you don't have to buy anything to see it. So I throw that out as education without hopefully a sales pitch attached to it. Any other questions? Feel free to reach out if that answer wasn't to point, or if you have any other questions, always happy to help on whatever I can. Well, and thank you for asking. Thank you all very much for your time today. I'm at nellinger@wearemore.com. Feel free to reach out. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn or however you prefer to reach out, but happy to help however I can. And thanks so much for your time.